welcome to The Big Picture. I am Tina Jha. Nearly 2 years after the National Medical Commission Act was passed, the Commission has released draft guidelines for medical colleges in the public domain, seeking feedback from people and various stakeholders. Over 25 guidelines have been listed on fixing fees in private and deemed medical colleges across the country. And once these norms are passed, fees for 50% MBBS and postgraduate medical seats in these colleges will be regulated. It will bring relief to those students who cannot pursue medical education, number one, because of limited seats in government institutes, and number two, because of exorbitant fees in the private ones. And the guidelines also clearly say no to the capitation fee, adding that the principle of education being not for profit are being strictly adhered to. The Commission hopes that these draft regulations are implemented as soon as possible before the next academic session begins. So when that happens is something that we'll have to wait and watch. So on this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the draft guidelines released by the National Medical Commission and what changes will these guidelines bring about in medical education in the country. Joining me are two distinguished panelists. So let me first introduce them to you. I have with me on The Big Picture Professor Mahesh Verma. He's member in National Medical Commission and Vice Chancellor Guru Gobind Singh Indraprasth University, Delhi. And Dr. Sunila Garg, Director, Professor and Head Community Medicine, Maulana Azad Medical College. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on the program today. Professor Verma, let me begin the show with you. Could you take us through some of the broad guidelines released by the NMC on which the Commission has now sought opinion from the public and the various stakeholders, sir?
Yeah, Tina, the basic bone of contention is that arriving at the fee on various parameters. Now in this guideline, which is more than about 26 of them, broad guidelines under different heads, is that the operating costs has to be the only basis of calculating the fee. Operating cost, and operating cost means for that particular program, for that particular course, so there are many, very finer aspects. I will just walk you through. So as I said that, when we are calculating the operating cost, which is the only basis of calculating the fee, the audited balance statement, a balance sheet of that institution in the last year, has to be a basis. So, so that is one. But also, the guidelines have also said that there could be some issues regarding the new institutions, which are, when they set up, because they need a little more, one is that they may not have a last year's audited statement of account, and secondly, in the beginning there are establishment expenses are also quite big. So how would you do it? So they suggested that in such institution, it should be done on an ad hoc basis, and it can be compared on a similarly placed institution which has been maybe 1 or 2 years old, and that could be a basis. That is another thing which they have. We are talking about operating costs that for like in this, during this pandemic time, in like 2021, where the expenses of some areas have come down and other areas have shot up, cannot be a basis of calculating operating costs. So in such situation, the last 2-3 years average can be computed, and that could be. So this is one. And secondly, another thing is that the fee which has been calculated, it should be on a 3-batch pattern. That means once a student knows how much he's supposed to pay, and he would be paying that fee throughout. There would be no provision that fee can be increased during the course of the course. And also, if they want to anticipate fee for the next years, there could be an annual adjustment pattern, whatever, in the financial system. And another thing is that, Indian accounting standards, there are certain standards that should be used to assess the segment accounting, that how much costing has occurred for a particular activity which is pertaining to that program. Another bone of contention has been that the hospital's setup needs a lot of money. And many a times all these establishment expenses are passed on to students. So hospital expenses entirely cannot be part of the fee. Of course, they also said that maybe a part of it, again, based on certain parameters, could be included. Another thing is the salaries of the teachers and salaries of the non-teaching staff. Board of Governors had already said that only 80% of the teacher's salary will be computed, will be used for operating costs, and 100% salaries of the non-teaching staff. Because teachers, the medical teachers, they also have a hospital component, they have a hospital practices. So entire salaries cannot be a burden for the students. So that's it. Then depreciation of assets and so many things like that.
A lot of positive changes that we are seeing in these guidelines that aim to make medical education more affordable. Dr. Verma, one of the striking features, in fact, one of the guidelines which is being talked about a lot in the media is that fees for 50% MBBS and postgraduate medical seats in the private and deemed universities will now be regulated. So going forward, if these norms are passed, what kind of changes will this bring about?
Because this guidelines also has also given a lot of clarity to the SFRC. Every state has got a state fee regulating committee, and they usually determine the fee for these 50% private seats. But there was no SFRC for the deemed universities. So deemed universities, they were determining their fee by having their own committee. They would constitute their own committee, and then they will determine the fee. So there were a lot of gray areas. So these guidelines also say that the fee for the deemed university should also be determined, will be same like the fee for the private 50% seats in the private colleges, as has been determined by SFRC, state fee regulating. So there's a lot of clarity. In the nutshell, these guidelines are directed at reducing the fee burden for the students. Because there are so many other areas like caution deposit, hostel fee, mess fee. Because many of these students, not only they pay their tuition fee, but they also mandatorily pay fee for all these miscellaneous activities, examination, library, transport, mess, and hostel expenses, all those things. So a lot of clarity. And development fee, that's another area that any institution which is built is likely to develop. But and then the best thing is that it has been linked with a rating system, that unless the institution do well and they show the performance, then only maybe 6 to 17% or something of the 15% of the development fee can be used for operating costs to deter the fee for the students. So there are some of these areas which is some of these points are so well student friendly, parent friendly. Hopefully this will bring less, much lighter burden to students, and meritorious students who were otherwise being denied, being deprived, rather say, I would say.
Absolutely. I think let me take
they would probably benefit from all this.
What Dr. Verma says has been the problem, and this is where the reforms were needed. What we've been seeing in our country, thousands of meritorious students, they were unable to fulfill their dream of pursuing medical education, primarily because of just two reasons: limited seats in government colleges and high fees, exorbitant fees in the private colleges. And this was where the government was expected to step in and bring about some kind of regulation. In fact, I was going through a report before this program, and which claimed that 28% of MBBS seats cost more than 10 lakh rupees per year only in tuition fees. So obviously, it means it was something which was meant only for the rich and not for the poor. So now towards making medical education more affordable, more inclusive, how significant, according to you, are these guidelines that have been released by the NMC?
Thank you, Tina. First of all, for bringing into this scenario and further taking up to what Dr. Mahesh Sharma said, that basically you see 28% of the seats, what you said, are costing 10 lakh rupees, only in form of tuition fees, which is very, very high, which is also, just taken into cognizance private medical colleges. It is not taken into consideration the deemed universities. Again, we have to see that there is variation between this and again, the most expensive seats are there in deemed universities, and over 8500 seats in these universities, they are constituting about 10% of the MBBS seats, which is an enormous number. So barely we'll see that again 3% of these 23,000 of the 7.7 who qualified, they are the ones who are applying for these seats. That means out of so many students who apply, only 3% can apply for the expensive seats. So there is a big divide, So National Medical Commission has taken into cognizance of this fact also. Again, basically, it leads to a virtual kind of a reservation. So there is a divide between a rich and poor. So this is where we need to look into the standardization part, which, Dr. Mahesh Verma already pointed out that, we need to look at into all the factors so that, we move towards the inclusiveness. That means, without any divide, because this is a, a course which everybody aspires for, particularly who is wanting to be a doctor. And in India, we know that, how much percentage of population is also, below poverty line. So we have to take into cognizance, as you rightly pointed out, about the, students who are meritorious, who are hardworking, but unfortunately they do not belong to that super segment of the society. So we have to take into cognizance. Again, you see, another thing which the National Medical Commission has taken into cognizance is that there is a divide, in different states also. When we talk of the normal seats also, there is a divide. So somewhere there is a need to bring out the uniformity amongst these seats also. So that is where I'll see that this document is, so-called visionary document in that direction. So which has taken into consideration the different parts, and based on this, and they have also taken into cognizance the fee of AIMS institutions, which are varying from 1628 to 5826 rupees per annum, which is actually lower than the cost of school fee also. So that is where I'll see that when the institutions which are built from the government perspective also, they also account for huge amount of over expenses. But then we see that the fees are regulated and the students can make to these institutions. But what about those? Because still there are limited number of seats in this 530 odd medical colleges. So that is where I'll say that this document is a progressive document in that direction, and that is taken into cognizance, and this is the beginning. So this is where in 2 years we have come out with this part, and we have to move forward in this direction. And as Dr. Verma pointed out, that it should not be only the tuition fee, but then other factors also, like hostel fee and all that. And another factor which is very, very important is that we have been in midst of COVID since last 2 years. The families may not be earning, there may not be enough this thing. Of course, from the medical colleges perspective also, there has been challenge in running the hospitals as well. So that is where particularly the private medical colleges, when we are talking of, it's a big challenge, So that so all this have to be taken into consideration. And once the student knows that he has to pay this much amount of fee, so probably he or she is better prepared to pay the fee, and that's where he has a clarity when he has to take the loans and all that. So this is one of the important components also.
Okay, Dr. Verma, so it's a visionary, significant step towards making medical education more student-friendly, more people-friendly, and making it, of course, more inclusive. We've established that, and in that regard, the NMC has now released draft guidelines. But now we are at a stage when the NMC has sought suggestions, opinions from all stakeholders, which obviously include the ones who are in the line of fire, the private colleges, the deemed universities, because two of the guidelines which may have larger implications, one of them, regulation of 50% seats, and the guidelines disallowing capitation fees in any form in these colleges. So what are the kind of implications are these two guidelines going to have on the private and deemed colleges? And what is the kind of response that you expect from them? Because obviously, as stakeholders, they are going to oppose it. So is the NMC anticipating any of that?
I know, because obviously, as some of these institutions are going to be affected, going to be hurt about these directly or indirectly by these guidelines, so obviously they're going to react, and they are not going to accept it. And because you see, you talked about expenses. Come again. You asked me a question. Come again. What did you ask me? A question?
The question is the two of the guidelines which are going to impact the private colleges and the deemed universities are that 50% regulation of seats is going to be there. And the second aspect is that the guidelines disallow capitation fees in
capitation. See, again, capitation is again a word which has been played very often, because I have seen in because it's something which is not accepted well. So in the garb of it, the fees has been increased, because earlier they used to charge a certain amount of a capitation fee. So they eliminated capitation and incorporated it into the fee itself. Because if you look at the fee structure of some of these deemed universities and some of these private universities, and they have management quota, they have NRI quota, where the fee ranges, like for a MBBS fee for an NRI quota in a deemed university could range from 25 lakh to 36 lakh rupees per annum. So that brings to about 1.5 crore rupee of fee, for the entire course. And similarly, it could be a little less or half of it for the management quota. So, so capitation, it's not just capitation, because they're not using this in the garb of a capitation. It is, there are other ways, caution deposit. There's so many other ways where students, are asked to, shell out or asked to part with the money. So that's one part. And certainly, because these 50% seats in the private colleges and deemed to be universities, I think it has been a bone of contention for a long. And different authorities, including state governments, regulatory bodies, medical council, dental council, they have gone to courts, and there has been a lot of judicial directions also, but somehow it is not uniform. It is not same throughout. In some of the states, as Sunita was saying, that in some of the states like West Bengal and similar states, even the private colleges, their fee is much lower as compared to fees in Karnataka, Rajasthan, Maharashtra. Even though they are same private college, they're running same institution with same kind of infrastructure, but they as low as 4 lakh rupees per annum, which is probably equivalent to a fee which is charged by another state government in a government institution. So there is a lot of variation. So I think it is high time all these gray areas which is there in computing fee, that is clarified.
Absolutely. And I think this disparity, yes, Dr. Verma, you spoke about is not just within the private colleges, but I think, Dr. Garg, let me bring that question to you. Is there disparity also among the government-run medical institutions across the country? Because there are institutions like AIIMS, which are charging very, very less amount of money from students, but compare it to the state-run institutes, they will be charging more money from the medical aspirants.
Yeah, definitely. You see, these are related to different costs. Particularly, the state charges are bound to be, they are, I'll say decided by the state, because you see there are state expenses with regard to running of the institutions, with regard to payment of salaries, with regard to maintenance of the hospitals and all that. So you see, that is one thing. There are two types of, when we talk of the institutions, there are autonomous institutions, there are, something like AIIMS-like institutions, if you'll say. Then there are institutions like, Maulana Azad-like institutions, which are directly under state government. And then, it varies from, again, where, partly your, I'll say the the teaching force comes from, the central government. Then also there are medical colleges where the teaching force comes from, the state government. So there is a difference in salaries also. So, it varies from state to state, and accordingly the salaries of the teachers, resident doctors, everything varies. So accordingly, it has got impact on the fees also. But what is also important, what needs to be looked into, what National Medical Commission has also pointed out with regard to, the security deposit, which is paid by the students, particularly in private medical colleges, that if there's any loss, kind of, so, in the end, they are going to return the security fee. But I think that is got to take into consideration, and which NMC has also brought to the picture, that we need to look into what kind of interest the student is losing on that, because it is not going to be a small sum of security. So that is another thing which needs to be an integral part of the whole thing. After all, another thing which I think, NMC over a period of time, since these are critical issues which need to be also brought out, like in West, we are talking about, not building huge infrastructure. Because you see, after all, these private medical colleges or deemed universities, they incur a lot of expenditure on developing huge infrastructure as per the guidelines. So somewhere, we need to also look at the guidelines, because outside, if you remember, Dr. Devi Shetty had once pointed out that why do we need such big, acres and acres of land, and then on top of it, we kind of have, the norms which are sometimes, they need to be re-looked into. Yes. So that particularly when private medical colleges and deemed universities especially are spending on that, so they will try to recover that in some form. And I think, medical education, though, it's a kind of a education, very novel education, but you see that we have to have a very, very realistic view of the fact that primarily we need to look at that how much expenditure is incurred on part of the universities, on part of the medical colleges and all, particularly the private ones I'm talking of. And then, we need to relook at, the student fee as well. But still we need to see that we all have got to be, my ultimate punchline is that the medical colleges have got to be inclusive. After all, we are talking of our own students. We need to extend the education to everyone. So that is one thing which is very, very important, and against which, Dr. Verma will agree with me. So as a, it's a beginning of, addressing these issues, and that's how the NMC document has tried to bring out these issues through
the effort is to bring in more and more transparency as far as fee structure is concerned, and also parity at the same time. But Dr.
Tina, I would like to clarify here that, a lot of people, a lot of private institution or deemed university, they might view that it has been brought to punish them or, find fault with them. That is not the intent.
My next question, in fact, is that their concern is that it is compromising or taking away their autonomy. So how valid is this concern, and how does the NMC, intend to take care of this concern then?
I think it is not primarily to, to hurt them or something. Basically, these guidelines are bringing in a lot of openness, lot of transparency, lot of judiciousness, that how we calculate what is the operating cost and how do we pass that cost to the student, and you see, because it happens sometime, I'm not saying all institutions, that sometime in the garb of operating cost, a lot of other cost, can also be passed on to a student in the garb of a fee. So, and these guidelines are not coming in the progress of any of these private or progressive deemed universities. No way.
Okay.
Only thing that they have to be very fair. They have to be fair in calculating, and it has to be a win-win. It has to be a very balanced kind of approach, so that a student also knows how much he is expected to pay, how much the course cost, and he is not indiscriminately, asked for money or burdened. Okay. And at the same time, there is no barrier for these institutions or universities in their progress.
Okay, okay, Dr. Verma, point taken. But the next big question, sir, is that these initiatives howsoever good they look on paper, they can bear fruit only if they're implemented in the right way. So according to the NMC, I'm sure you must have analyzed what are the potential challenges or roadblocks that you see in effective implementation of these guidelines going forward.
The implication is that, as Sunila said, that their autonomy, they are going to say that their autonomy is affected. They can afford to give a higher quality, higher kind of infrastructure, higher environment, higher kind of surroundings for a student. So they have to account for, in the fee accordingly. That is one. And you see, otherwise, I don't think these are the intention of these guidelines is any bad or any any kind of a barrier to the progress of these universities. Only thing that another implication is that we may bring in these guidelines, but we all know how do we go about and circumvent. We know to get around and find newer ways. So we have seen that happening. So hopefully that doesn't happen, and hopefully all the stakeholders who are concerned about these guidelines, about the intent of these guidelines.
Absolutely,
I agree.
The intent is good, but
feel the true spirit of these, in what spirit these guidelines have been brought in. And I think, I feel that at the end of it, it should be win-win for everybody, for all the stakeholders, the institutions, the universities, the parents, the students, and the entire education system.
Okay, so Dr. Garg, coming to you for the final question, because we are speaking about challenges, and one challenge that has also been cited is that while the guidelines say that colleges must adhere to the not-for-profit model, it will be very, very good in the sense that it will be inclusive. It will provide a relief to all those students who could not afford to study in these colleges earlier. But the question is, will they not deter the private players from entering this field if there is no profit? Because for every good thing, whenever we talk about quality, we look towards the private sector. Even for India's development story, we are always told to take along both the public and the private. They should walk together. So how can we strike a balance between taking both along so that it is not discouraging for either of the two?
See, definitely that is why you see it is important to look at the fee structure very, very carefully. That means when we are looking at the tuition fee, it has got to be something very, very legitimate, not extending from 25 lakhs a year to approximately to a crore, or to many lakhs of rupees. So we have to see that, and there has got to be not big difference. You see, when we see, you pointed out yourself that between the state colleges, even in the government colleges there is this thing, but then we have a justification. It has got to be some difference. But at the end of it, when we look at the private colleges, have to run the hospitals, they have to run the medical college itself, they have to pay the fees also. But considering everything, look, they must carefully look at how much is the auditing which they are getting it done, which has to be, I'll say, realistic.
Okay, I think so. What's important, and what both our panelists are pointing out, that these reforms are a step further towards bringing about parity and transparency in medical education, and these in fact are the much needed overhaul that have been suggested by experts for quite long in the medical education sector in India. So going forth, we're all hopeful that valuable suggestions and opinions will come in from stakeholders, which the NMC has sought, and after which, when these norms are implemented, they will serve the objective with which they have been formulated. So with that, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you once again to both my guests, Dr. Verma and Dr. Garg, for joining us on the program and sharing your valuable perspective with us and our viewers. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. And to our viewers, I want to make an appeal. Like every day, we are still going through the unprecedented crisis of the second wave of the pandemic. So take care of yourselves and your families, and that is by maintaining appropriate COVID behavior, basic precautions that we need to continue taking until we sail through this crisis. So take care and see you same time tomorrow. Goodbye.